those wet and cold winters aren't all bad. We get all that moisture, and that real cold will kill off some of these bugs that we're having hopefully around here. So I won't be saying that in the middle of January when it's down 5 degrees, but so I'll say it now. That will be good for us. Good for us. All right. Did you ever? Hello. Have you ever dealt with some broken contracts of some kind? Had to deal with contractors that weren't carrying through with their work, or other kind of contracts? Had to deal with the temporary. Buddy, you're fortunate if you haven't had to deal with. Richard, you had to deal with some? Tell me all.
I had with marriage, my first marriage. Then my brokenness of my daughter, my faith.
Mary Jane, could you speak louder, please?
Okay, my brokenness with my first marriage, and then I had my relationship with my daughter, my faith, the teachings of Christ, the apostles, the foundation of Christ, and it seems like I can't get to her.
Yeah.
So I have been broken, but God has been helping me so much in every way. So I have learned to be at ease with knowing that God understands us. He knows, and I'm okay.
When we sign a contract, we expect for the other party to live up to the contract, do we not? After all, especially these days, all that legal language in that contract, it's bound to have some kind of meaning somewhere down the line. I think it's just to get the lawyers paid, but I'm not sure. I remember when I was at Grand Court, we did a major remodel for our kitchen area. It was like something $1.3 million or something like that. So we were tearing everything out. I mean, we went down to the dirt with that area, and it was supposed to have been completed by this date. And if not completed by that date, there was to be $1,000 a day penalty for the contractor. It didn't get completed by that date, or a month later, or a month later, or a month later. In fact, I'm not sure even now that the full contract has ever been completely completed. But at some point, somebody in my company authorized that the bill be paid. And at that point, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't done. And I raised Cain, and I called the contractor, and it turned out the contractor had handed over to the guy to head up the contract. That guy had run away with everything. When contracts are broken, it's not fun. No, it's you got employment contracts. I've had 2 employees that have absconded with funds on me, that were in positions that were very responsible positions. So this deal, don't get emotional, it's only broken promises. Well, do you take those broken promises sort of personal sometimes? Like it's not just a contract, it's something against me. Well, Jeremiah talks about broken contracts, broken contract with God. Now, last week, as we got into the book, we talked about that 3 encounters that Jeremiah had with God. First encounter that God was calling him, and we know that we can make excuses when God's calling, as Jeremiah made the excuses. I'm too young, I can't talk. But at some point, we've got to accept the call, or we got to turn it down. Jeremiah's accepting the call, and then God appears again, and he says, "Hey, see what I see? What do you see, Jeremiah?" Well, I see an almond tree, and we get the idea that God's watching, God's wakeful. God is wanting to make sure that His words are carried out. He's watching over Israel, and that's sort of a double the way there. He's watching Israel, and he's watching over Israel, and he's watching Jeremiah to really take care of Jeremiah, and then the symbol of the boiling pot coming down from the north, and this is sort of a quick glimpse at the rest of the book at the end of chapter 1 there. This boiling point tilting toward Judah from the north. And as part of that, tells Jeremiah, get yourself ready. Get yourself ready. I'm gonna make you a fortified city, an iron pillar, a bronze wall. So in chapter 2, we start out, God's talking about broken contract, Israel's story of a broken contract. And through much of this reading today and through other parts of Jeremiah, we'll see this comparison of God's relationship with Israel as a marriage, as a bride and a groom. And so there's some awful important points of a marriage relationship, isn't there? Start to ask what words come to mind when you think of a marriage relationship. But let's ask a better question, because not all marriage relationships are good. What qualities are ideal for a marriage relationship? What do you think? What's needed for an ideal marriage relationship? Communication. That's what Dewey asked that Wednesday night. That's what I said first thing. Communication.
Commitment.
Commitment. Trust. Respect. Faithfulness.
Flexibility.
Pardon?
Flexibility.
Ooh, flexibility.
On both sides.
Yeah. On all 6 sides, I think. Yeah. What else? Honesty. Okay. Accountability. Yeah. Forgiveness. Well, I haven't said the main word yet.
Faithfulness.
But we said faithfulness.
Steadfast.
Love. Yeah. Love. Yeah. So all of these that we've talked about, are they not important in relationship with God as well? That we have all of these. Well, so let's look here at Israel's story. Look at it first 3 verses of chapter 2. The word of the Lord came to me, go and proclaim in the hearing of Israel. This is what the Lord said. I remember the devotion of your youth. How as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness and through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of his harvest. And all who devoured her were held guilty, and disaster overtook them, declares the Lord. Was the honeymoon relationship with Israel pretty good? Yeah, looks like it's what God says, you know. And God is encountering, by the way, with Jeremiah at this point. In chapter 1, the encounters that God had with Jeremiah, they're sort of personal, aren't they? This is, I'm sending you, this is the way it's to be, this is what's going to happen. But look what he says here. Go and proclaim this in the hearing of Jerusalem. This is for everybody to hear. This is not just you. He begins talking about this great relationship that he had with the people of Israel, that he wants with the people of Israel, that he wants with us. And using words like devotion. And devotion speaks of loyalty, faithfulness, affection. The people were devoted to me. Had that innocent love, that innocent feeling, that innocent wanting to be together.
Even in the wilderness, though, they were not.
Pardon?
I said, even in the wilderness, they were not devoted. They left them against him and time again.
Absolutely, but you notice he does say they did follow me through the wilderness. No? Even though they have this facts that marriages often have, we'll put it that way. They were willing to follow me anywhere. Devoted to me, willing to follow me anywhere. Yes, there were definitely some problems that began in the wilderness, right? They were also set apart. This marriage contract is two ways. God has set them apart. They were holy to the Lord, and because of that relationship, they were the first to experience His blessings, first to experience His glory, and they were under His protection, as certainly a young husband would want to protect his wife. Well, an old husband too. Certainly is that good relationship with. And so, despite, as Sandra said, there were some spats that go on. There were pretty some heavy stuff there. The people were following him, right? So, if you look at what he's done for them, what that relationship is, it's not surprising as we get into some of this other stuff that he says later on that the heavens shuddered at how their relationship developed. Chapter 2, starting with verse 4. Hear the word of the Lord, you descendants of Jacob, all you clans of Israel. This is what the Lord said. What fault did your ancestors find in me that they strayed so far from me? They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. They didn't ask, where is the Lord who brought us out of Egypt and led us through the barren wilderness, through a land of deserts and ravines, a land of drought and utter darkness, a land where no one travels and no one lives. I brought you into a fertile land to eat its fruit and its rich produce, but you came and defiled my land and made my inheritance detestable. The people did not ask, where is the Lord? Those who deal with law did not know me. The leaders rebelled against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal, following worthless idols. Therefore I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord, and I will bring charges against your children's children. Cross over to the coast of Cyprus and look and send to Keter and observe closely. See if there has ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they were not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glorious God are worthless idols. Be appalled at this, you heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. So here God, who has led his bride through the barren wilderness, through a land of deserts and ravines, brought them to a fertile land to eat its produce. The honeymoon's over. They have turned, and they followed other lovers. That was verse 6. We talked about them following worthless idols. Worthless idols. That's unfathomable to me. We'll talk about this more than once, but they've gone from a God who's taking them through all of this, pulled them out of slavery, taking them through the wilderness. Yes, they did have to wander in the wilderness, and they kept rebelling against him. And they get into the land of Canaan, and first of all, they don't get rid of the tribes that are in the land of Canaan that God tells them to. And why does God tell them to do that? Just so this very thing doesn't happen. And then they start looking around, and they don't want God. They want worthless idols. Worthless idols that make them worthless. And it's like they've forgotten God. Verse 6, they didn't ask, where is the Lord who brought us out of Egypt? They weren't looking for God at all. They were looking for something else. And this was even startling to the pagan nations. Even were startled at this. What nation has ever changed their God? Israel did. Israel did. And where did this start? Who did it start with? It started with their leaders on top of that. The priest, those who should have had the most intimate relationship with God, those who God had appointed to carry out the rituals, etc. Those to whom the people came with their sacrifices to be laid before God. The priest.
Even Aaron, he was the priest.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. The priest, it says those who deal with the law, the scribes, those who copied that law and brought it down for generations, the scribes, the leaders, the kings. That's where Jeremiah is laid in this period of kingship. They're leaders. And even the prophets, prophets prophesied by who? By Baal. The leaders brought them down. And I guess, so what's our mission statement say? Disciple.
Know God.
Know God.
Love God.
Love God.
Glorify
Glorify God. So we can probably say then, they didn't know God.
They wanted to feel good.
All those things they did, they forgot God. They couldn't have
Yeah, wanted to feel
the
good.
blessing of God.
Yeah.
They were worshiping the devil.
Didn't even ask, where is God? They didn't know God. If you don't know God, how can you love God? And if you don't can't love God, how can you glorify God? Now, has a nation ever changed its gods? Startling even to the pagan nations. And in this next verse is sort of interesting. My people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me, the spring for living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Ryan Outland writes this about that verse. He says, where there is water, there is life, making that substance of life the most important and the most necessary substance for people to live. We often take it for granted that when we turn on a faucet, we'll get good, clean water to flow. You don't expect that brown stuff to come out of a faucet, do you? That's not always been the case. There's some parts of the world where it's not a case even today. And that was not the case for ancient Israel. To collect a supply of water, the people constructed wells and cisterns in order to survive. Cisterns were the most common way to gather clean water for the purpose of drinking and cleaning. Cisterns were often built to collect rainwater, operating a drain to gather runoff water, which would be contained inside. Cisterns were an essential part of life for an Israelite in the times of the Bible. And so God has said, I provided you water. God has said, I've offered you springs of living water. And what he says, he's not you just not you built cisterns to contain this living water. You built leaky cisterns. Leaky cisterns. Cisterns that look more like this without any water, instead the ones that hold water.
That reminds me of my septic tank.
Yeah. It's you've refused the source of life, and you're attempting your own source. That's a way to say it. He continues talking about their infidelity and their unfaithfulness. Skip to verse 20. Long ago, you broke off your yoke, you tore off your bonds. You said, I will not serve. Indeed, on every high hill and under every spreading tree, you lay down as a prostitute. Raise your hand if you're a prostitute in here today. I hope not. And is that just something that we as Christians would say, no way would I ever turn to that? Do you think possibly people of Israel said, no way would I ever turn to that? That's what God is calling you. You are a prostitute. I planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into corrupt, vile vine? Although you wash yourself with soap and use an abundance of cleansing power, and the stain of your guilt is still before me, declares the sovereign Lord. How can you say I'm not defiled? I've not run after the Baals. How did you see how you behaved in the valley? Consider what you have done. Notice the descriptiveness of these next verses. You are a swift she-camel running here and there, a wild donkey accustomed to the desert, sniffing the wind in her craving in her heat. Who can restrain her? Any males that pursue her need not tire themselves. At mating time, they will find her. Do not run until your feet are bare and your throat is dry. But you said, it's no use. I love foreign gods. I must go after them. Pretty good confirmation there. You know, the idea of sexual union, that sexual union in marriage, is used by God to to talk about that covenant relationship that God had, that tightness of a relationship when God and his bride come together. And he's saying, you've destroyed what was to be sacred. You have become prostitutes because you're looking for union with something besides me. You're looking for something else. You're not satisfied anymore. You have a lack of contentment with God, and so you've left your honeymoon for a life of prostitution. And going back to how then did you turn again? Let's see. I had planted you like a choice vine, a sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into corrupt wild vine? You're doing something that's not natural. God has planted the Israelites, planted the people of Judah as one thing. You've turned into another. You've turned into something that is not natural. And when you do this, you lie to yourself. How can you say I'm not defiled? I'm not run after the Baals. When sin is full of you, within you, you devalue, you exploit yourself, and you lie to yourself. You don't know who you really are. And their cravings are for anything but God. She was as a wild donkey in heat. The Message reads in verses 23 and 24, how dare you tell me I'm not stained by sin? I've never chased after the Baal's sex gods. Well, look at the tracks you've left in the valley. How do you account for what is written in the desert dust? Tracks of a camel in heat, running this way and that, tracks of a wild donkey in rut, sniffing the wind for the slightest scent of sex. Who could possibly corral her on the hunt for sex and more sex, insatiable, indiscriminate, promiscuous? It's pretty blunt, isn't it? As the Message puts it. One of the men mentioned Wednesday night that they were a hunter. And hunting season is not during the mating season for deer. Because he says during the mating season for deer, the bucks just run wild. They don't look out for safety and everything. They just run wild looking for the doe to mate with. This is the way the people of Israel. They're running wild. They don't care. They're just, I love foreign gods and I must go after them. That's the way God puts it. Moving on to verse 31. 30. In vain I punished your people. They did not respond to correction. Your sword has devoured your prophets like a ravenous lion. You of this generation consider the word of the Lord. Have I been a desert to Israel, our land of darkness? Who do my people say, we are free to roam? We will come to you and no more. Does a young woman forget her jewelry? A bride, her wedding ornaments? Yet my people have forgotten me, days without number. How skilled you are at pursuing love. Even the worst of women can learn my ways. On your clothes is found the lifeblood of the innocent poor, though you do not catch them breaking in. Yet in spite of all this, you say, I'm innocent. He's not angry with me, but I will pass judgment on you because you say, I have not sinned. How do you go about is so much changing your ways? You will be disappointed by Egypt as you were by Assyria. You will also leave that place in your hands on your head. The Lord has rejected those who trust. You will not be helped by them. And so, again, God continues to paint Judah as is one who's forsaken her marriage bonds. It seems like she's forgotten God, just like she's completely forgotten her groom. She sold her wedding jewelry. She stained her wedding dress. And as Francisco intimates, that sin is not only unnatural, as I mentioned before, but it's illogical, doesn't it? How could Israel go through all of that? And God pretty well saying in this passage that because his bride has removed any reminders of her exclusivity and with God's covenant, that God is going to remove her from his protection and his blessing. So Israel's core problem. We talked about how the marriage covenant was good. We looked at the infidelity and faithfulness. Israel's core problem, threefold. Worthless devotion. As verse 5 says, they followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. One translation would say they walked after emptiness and became empty. If you think about these idols, and it's used further on here, talking about wood and stone. Put that wood and stone in there for idol. And you can say you followed wood and stone and became like wood and stone yourselves. What's the value of wood and stone? As far as, does it have any life in it at all? Now, wood does as long as it's still in the tree. But after wood's cut down to be made into an idol, there is nothing. Oh, it's pretty sometimes. But wood doesn't even last. Wood will eventually rot away. And you've idolized this wood and stone that is nothing. There is no life in it, and you have become that yourself. You become nothing. You become empty. There is no life in it. Verses, well, let me see. I'll get to that in a minute. So worthless devotion, a lack of awe. Lack of awe and devotion leads to evil and bitterness. And consider, and then in verse 19, consider then and realize how evil and bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no awe for me. It's not evil and bitter for God. Well, I guess it would be. He would have some bitterness there. But it's the evil that affects them. Our turning from God affects us. Our turning from God condemns us. It doesn't condemn God.
God doesn't need us, we need him.
That's right. That's right. That turning from God, it's a punishment in itself that exists. Contrast with what the psalmist says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A lack of fear is a condemnation. It brings evil and bitterness. And third is turning one's back results in turning one's head. Verse 27. They said to wood, you are my father, and to stone, you gave me birth. It just makes you want to laugh just to read that passage, doesn't it? They've turned their backs to me and not their faces, and yet they're when you're in trouble, they say, come and save us. And when I have my back to you, Can I see you? Can
No.
you see my face?
No.
Can I turn my face to you if I've got my back to you?
No.
An owl could, but I can't. No? When we turn our back on God, we can't turn. You can't have it both ways. You know, and at times they tried to turn to God, or they called out for God. They were worshiping these idols. Yet when they are in trouble, they say, "Come and save us." Just like that cycle that they had during the time of the judges. They would follow God, then they'd turn away from God, and then they'd get in trouble, and then they'd call to God. God bring a judge in and save them, and they'd follow God, and then they turn away from God. Then, you know, it just kept them going. Well, you would think with all of this, now, if you had a spouse that was acting like this, spouse that had turned into a prostitute, right? Spouse that didn't even care about you, didn't love you, turned it back to you, wouldn't even face you when you're around, what would you do? What would we do today?
Divorce.
Divorce, yeah. And God certainly has said that he's turning his back on them. But look at 3, verse 1. If a man divorces his wife and she leaves him and marries another man, should he return to her again? Would not the land be completely defiled? But you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me? And we think about that, and yet look down verse 14. God says, "Return, faithless people, declares the Lord, for I am your husband. I will choose you, one from a town, one from a clan, and bring you to Zion. Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding." Despite all that he's showing the people here, God is there with open arms.
It's always been merciful.
It's always been merciful. And I can't help think of the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal went into that distant land and spent all his father's money and reveled in all of that, and found himself amongst the pigs, and returned to God, and God's standing there, coming out to meet him. Father is with open arms. And it's not the parable of the prodigal son. It's the parable of the welcoming father. That's so important. Here is God in the same way. He says, you know, these people can return. And here's the secret. Yeah.
Rembrandt's picture of accepting the prodigal son is portrayed in
Okay.
and it's just as you look at it, it shows the other brother shows the acceptance of accepting the son.
In case you didn't hear that, Rembrandt's picture of the father accepting the prodigal son is in our lobby here. So check that out. So God says, here's how this happens. First, confession. Return, verse 22. Return, faithless people, and I will cure you, backsliding. Yes, we will come to you, for you are the Lord, you are the Lord our God. Surely the idolatrous commotion on the hills and the mountains is a deception. Surely in the Lord our God is the salvation of Israel. From your youth, shameful gods have consumed the fruits of your ancestors' labor, their flocks, their herds, their sons, and their daughters. So verse 22 especially, yes, we will come. So that confession. And so I say, if you're gonna get back to God, you gotta acknowledge the problem. You gotta acknowledge it. And second, verse 25. Let us lay down in our shame. Let our disgrace cover us. We've sinned against the Lord our God, both we and our ancestors from our youth till this day. We have not obeyed the Lord our God. There's got to be some remorse there, doesn't there? We got to feel it. We got to feel that remorse to return to that honeymoon period with God. Third, repentance. Chapter 4, 1 and 2. If you, Israel, will return, then return to me, declares the Lord. If you put your detestable idols out of my sight and no longer go astray, and in a truthful, just and righteous way you swear, as surely as the Lord lives, then the nations will invoke these blessings by him, and in him they will boast. Again, we've got to acknowledge we got the problem. We got to feel that. We've got to feel shame for that. And we've got to get rid of it. We've got to get rid of these practices that we're doing. We've got to turn around. We've got to return to God. Put those detestable idols out of my sight and no longer go astray. And finally, sanctification. Verses 3 and 4 of chapter 4. This is what the Lord says to the people of Judah and to Israel and to Jerusalem. Break up your unplowed ground and do not sow among thorns. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord. Circumcise your hearts, the people of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Or my wrath will flare up and burn like fire because of the evil you have done. Burn with no one to quench it. It's not enough to acknowledge it. It's not enough to feel sorry about it, to repent of it. It's not enough to get rid of it. We've got to replace it. We've got to fill in that gap, because if you leave something empty, what's going to happen? Something's going to fill back up. Absolutely. And so we've got to fill it back up with what God would have us do. So that's Israel's story. A story of devotion to God, honeymoon period, and then a story of great rebellion against God. And I guess the question is, could that become our story too? Because I see, I ask, how in the world could somebody start worshiping stones and wood? Well, in the same way that we get led astray. As we look on others around us, saying, looking at those stones and wood, well, that's really interesting how they, why do they do that? I'm going to look into it, see how they do, see what the deal is there. And then, because God is active in this world, God is wanting for us in this world, but Satan's active too. And Satan wants to pull us in any way we can. And so stay away from the stones and the wood, at least for this week, would you? Chapters 5 through 8 next week.
You became a losing